Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I thank my friend, the senior senator from Arizona, for his great work over the years, and particularly now in the Armed Services Committee that he chairs. And he's been tenacious in his attempt to make sure that no dollars are inadvertently or unknowingly wasted, especially when it comes to the Pentagon. I, for one, believe that this is the #1 priority of our country. I know he shares that view, but it's pretty hard to make the argument that we ought to continue to give more money to the Pentagon if the money's not being used efficiently, either because of their internal administrative problems or for some other reason. And I know, because I happened to be there this morning at the Pentagon, many of our military chiefs are concerned that things that are being put in appropriations bills are not things that they actually want or need, and that there are other priorities. And the best way to get those vetted is through the Senate Armed Services Committee and working with the Appropriations Committee to make sure that the money is being used as efficiently as possible and not wasted, certainly on not things that the military doesn't want or doesn't need. So I thank him for his continued leadership. I wanted to talk about a few topics here. #1 is the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act, the legislation we've been working on now for 2 weeks. And anybody who's been listening understands the importance of this legislation, which will help stem the tide of the massive epidemic of opioid prescription drug abuse and heroin abuse that continues to claim lives across our country. This bill is actually a good example of how the Senate can work in a bipartisan fashion to advance good policies that positively impact the lives of ordinary American citizens. I know most people in this polarized environment are not aware of this bipartisan work that we've been able to do over this year and last year, but we've actually done a number of good things. Some, if you told them, they may not even believe it. But to people who are open to the facts, I think this is another good example. And of course, in this instance, it's been the result of strong leadership from the junior senator from New Hampshire, Senator Ayotte, Senator Portman of Ohio, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, the senior senator from Iowa, Senator Chuck Grassley, along with our Democratic counterparts, people like Senator Whitehouse. I'm hopeful this legislation will contain an amendment that I've offered last week to help those who struggle with both substance abuse and mental illness. It's estimated that more than 10 million Americans suffer from both addiction and mental health disorders. These are called co-occurring disorders. And it's a fact that many people who don't otherwise get treatment for their mental health problems try to self-medicate, making their lives even more complicated and worse. And that's what this amendment is designed to address. Many mental health and substance abuse services, like specialty courts, have operated on separate tracks, and they only treat one part of the problem. This amendment really isn't all that earth-shaking. All it would do is make the common sense link between mental health and substance abuse something that we direct our existing criminal justice programs to apply to these coexisting disorders as well. That way, people who struggle with both addiction and mental health problems can have both of those problems addressed by the money we're already appropriating and already spending in grants to local law enforcement and medical providers. It would also expand substance abuse and transitional services to help those suffering from co-occurring disorders receive the treatment they need to recover. So I look forward to voting on this legislation and getting it passed soon. I would note that we are having a few bumps along the way, Mr. President, in terms of our Democratic friends allowing votes on amendments. There are apparently about 25 different amendments that have been negotiated between the Republicans and Democrats, but I'm told that our Democratic friends are objecting to any amendments by senators who happen to be running for election in 2016. Now, the Democratic leader, just in a fit of candor, the other day said they were going to object to the senator from Wisconsin, Senator Johnson's amendment, because he was running for election. Well, I would ask them to back off of that sort of political hardball, and let's get our work done. It doesn't help when they object to non-controversial amendments or they take certain amendments hostage because they don't want somebody to score points by getting something done. I mean, that's why we are sent here, is to get things done for our constituents. And I want to just share on the amendment that I mentioned just a moment ago, that apparently is one of those being held hostage as well. I'd like to share a letter from the National Alliance on Mental Illness, the American Correctional Association, and the National Association of Police Organizations that support the amendment I just talked about. So if the Democratic leadership won't listen to me, maybe you'll listen to them. And I hope they'll listen to the voices of the families that suffer from mental illness and law enforcement officials. So I'd ask consent, Mr. President, at the end of my remarks, that this be made part of the record.
Without objection.
Separately, earlier this morning, I joined my colleagues on the Senate Judiciary Committee to hear testimony from the Attorney General of the United States, Loretta Lynch. As a former Attorney General of my state, I have always taken a great interest in our system of justice at the state level and now certainly at the national level, and tried to do everything I can to help strengthen the rule of law and help keep the American people safe. And that includes transparent and fair investigations. So I spent a little bit of time asking the Attorney General this morning about her department's investigation into the former Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, and her use of a private email server during her tenure. And I talked about my concerns surrounding her use of an unsecure email server many times. I have talked about that many times on the floor. The former secretary did refuse to use the government server and decided to basically play by her own rules, setting up this server at her home in New York. But the fact of the matter is, this sort of reckless conduct put our country at great risk. Several experts from the intelligence community have outlined how her unsecure server left her emails, some highly classified, vulnerable to hacking and cyber attacks. So this is a very serious matter. Last fall, about 6 months ago, I asked the Attorney General to appoint a special counsel to fairly and fully conduct an investigation. And that's because Secretary Clinton is not just a random citizen or former government employee. Her case is awfully high profile. And as a result, I think there are many questioning whether she is being treated in exactly the same way as any other citizen would be treated under similar circumstances, or whether she's getting some sort of preferential treatment. Because the Attorney General is a political appointee of the President of the United States, and given Ms. Clinton's high profile, there are real conflicts of interest and real concerns about politics ahead of justice. Those could be addressed and mitigated by providing a special counsel, as the law provides, to provide some measure of independence from the Attorney General so the public can have confidence that this case is being treated just like every other case and not with some sort of political favoritism based on a conflict of interest. This morning, I questioned the Attorney General about recent reports that the department has granted immunity to the staffer who set up Secretary Clinton's private server. So just so anybody listening understands, the only reason that immunity would be granted in a criminal investigation is if somebody invokes their Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination. But if given immunity, then that individual must cooperate with law enforcement authorities and cannot refuse to answer questions because they no longer have any likelihood or any chance of being convicted of that crime having been granted immunity. This does indicate that this investigation has taken on a new level of seriousness, and I suspect the FBI continues to be hard at work trying to get to the bottom of this, as I would expect them to do. But I hope this indicates that the Department of Justice, who is integral to this grant of immunity, because the FBI can't do this on their own. It takes the prosecutors at the Department of Justice to agree to a grant of immunity as part of an investigation. But I hope this indicates the department is treating this case with the great care and the gravity that it deserves. But I still believe the American people deserve an independent investigation, and I'll continue to press for the appointment of a special counsel to that end. Finally, Mr. President, I wanted to address another issue that I questioned the Attorney General about, and that is about needed reforms to our mental health system. I believe I repeated to her today, I've repeated this story so many times, I sometimes forget when I've said it before, but I recently had a chance to meet with a number of major county sheriffs. And somebody asked me, would you like to meet the largest mental health provider in America? I said, well, sure. I said, well, he's over here. It's the sheriff of Los Angeles County. So the fact of the matter is, many people incarcerated in our jails are suffering from mental illness, and they may have committed petty crimes like trespass and the like. But they're not getting their condition treated as long as they are warehoused in jails. And so many communities, like my hometown of San Antonio, Texas, has created really a model of how to divert people from jail to get their mental health issues treated. And at the same time, make sure that we don't continue this turnstile of people coming in and out of our jails when their underlying mental illness problems is not being treated. Well, I've asked her to take a look at a bill that I've introduced called the Mental Health and Safe Communities Act, which is designed to help families and communities who are struggling to help their loved ones who are mentally ill. Many families don't have access to adequate treatment or lack the resources to comply with doctors' orders. And the fact of the matter is, back in the 90s, back when a major policy change was made in America and people were essentially turned out of institutions where the mentally ill were treated, there wasn't any follow-up to make sure that there was some sort of safety net or some follow-on treatment to make sure that their needs were taken care of. And so today, any of us have walked down the street in a major American city know we have a lot of homeless people living on our streets who are essentially suffering from some form or another of mental illness, and their needs are not being addressed. And some of them, perhaps because they abuse alcohol or other drugs in order to try to medicate or take care of their problems on their own, they end up committing crimes of one type or another, not necessarily what I would call a serious crime, but serious enough to get them arrested and in jail. So I'm hopeful that we will take this opportunity as we're looking at our criminal justice system writ large, along with prison reform and legislation that's passed out of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and which I hope will soon come to the floor of the Senate, to deal with issues like this confluence of mental health and criminal justice in a way that is more enlightened, in a way that's cheaper, in a way that's more humane and more efficient than just simply warehousing people who are mentally ill in our criminal justice system. We can do better, and I'm hopeful that models like those in Bexar County, Texas, where mentally ill persons are able to find programs that actually help them solve their underlying problem, those kind of models are helpful to the rest of the country and us as we try to craft means for our communities to better care for those suffering from mental illness. So I look forward to moving this legislation soon. I know the chairman of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, Senator Alexander, tells me he's been working with Senator Murray, his ranking member, along with Senator Cassidy and Senator Murphy on another piece of legislation that they're proposing on the mental health space. And my hope is that the group of us who are interested in this issue can cobble together a consensus piece of legislation which the majority leader could then bring to the floor of the Senate to let us do some additional important bipartisan work to help address this problem. Mr. President, I don't see any senator wishing to speak, so I would suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.